you to Erin Vobornick, and we're going to start recording and start our presentation. Thank you so much for taking your time to present with us today, Erin.
Thanks for having me. All right, so I'm going to talk about infusing advocacy into the adult education classroom today. So a quick disclaimer before I get started. I am going to ask you to engage with some discussion questions throughout, and they're discussion questions reflecting on advocacy and your experiences. So please engage, but do so in a way that's comfortable for you. So I will have some anonymous poll everywhere options. If you want to share, but you want it to be anonymous, you can also share in the chat. And if you feel like, I just really don't want any chance that my name will be linked to my reflection, please feel free to do so privately in your own notes. But in return, I will be open and vulnerable here about my experiences. So I wanted to start by asking, what is advocacy? So in your own words, I know we're all tech savvy, don't Google it. You can feel free to use the poll everywhere. You can put it up in the chat. But in just a sentence or two, what is advocacy? Thanks, Tara, for putting that, that link in there. Okay, Rita, I see helping students help themselves. Fantastic. Helping others find a voice. I like that, Elizabeth. Support, I see popping up on our screen. Striving for something you're passionate about, voice for students, standing up for what you believe in. Absolutely. Oh, Kathy, I like that. I'd like to highlight this. To me, it is being aware of your environment, what is best for you and others in your situation, and helping out to make the situation better for all. All right, these are fantastic responses, and I am excited. I'll give one more minute. Right, using your position to support students who may not have learned how to do so themselves. Fantastic, Michael. Okay. I'm going to click on the next slide. Feel free to continue typing your answers into the chat. Let me move on here. Okay, so I'd like to take a moment here to highlight, why advocacy is important. So advocacy is the reason that our adult education classes are free, right? So that is in fact thanks to ICCB. That's why I circled their logo there. And in case you're wondering how these things are connected, it's that every year ICCB's senior director, Dr. Kathy Olson-Tracy, advocates on behalf of all of our adult education programs in Illinois to OCTAE, which is the federal government's Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education. And that is how we get the funds that we need to make our classes free. So advocacy is also the reason why we have that broadband benefit program, which benefits so many of our adult learners. That's how that came to pass. It's the reason for increased funding. It's the reason why so many of our programs that are still here survived the funding challenges back in 2014 and 2015. So advocacy gets things done. In case you were wondering, Erin, are you ever going to get around to introducing who you are? Yes. So I'm Erin Vobornick. I teach ESL and bridge classes at Elgin Community College, and I'm also COAB's Illinois State Advocate for Adult Education. And I like to put up here too that I am an introvert. So I'll hit on each one of these. I've been in the adult education field now for about 8 years. And the State Advocate for Adult Education program that I'm involved with is about kind of gaining that confidence and gaining the skills to reach out to legislators, write op-eds, think of new and exciting ways to really engage with the field and to advocate. So like I said, I promised vulnerability and honesty. And so I put introvert up here because I am a socially anxious introvert. Had you met me like 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you would have said, I would not have ever pegged this woman as being someone who would reach out to legislators or speak out or present at conferences. And I like to point this out because advocacy, and especially to a greater deal, self-advocacy, were not skills I believed that I had growing up. I thought those were skills that decisive extroverts had. And this is I think a common misconception and one that our students share as well, but it's that change doesn't necessarily occur from people who speak the loudest. So advocacy can be subtle. It can be, I was trying to think of the opposite of subtle. I said extravagant. But I want us to hold on to this idea as we move forward through this session today, breaking out of the mindset that an advocate fits a specific mold. So it's something that perhaps we need to confront, but something we need to be prepared to confront with our students as well. So I am an educator, so you know I like to have my objectives. So today, the 3 objectives that I want to cover today are to highlight the importance of advocacy skills, break down what self-advocacy is into characteristics, to focus instruction and to focus feedback, and then also to provide sample lessons and resources that are standards aligned. So things, if you're a teacher, that you can take and say, all right, I can start using this next week. So again, I like to hear from you. What's an example of a time that you advocated for something? You can do this through the same poll everywhere. Again, this one might be a bit personal, so feel free to just journal it if you would like to. Oh, fantastic. Advocated for services for students, institutional supports at the doctor's office. Absolutely. Hotspots, ICAPS programs, IEP needs. If you see me looking to the side, I've got my second screen so I can see all of the responses coming in everywhere. Okay, helped found and served on a board for nonprofit that supports undocumented immigrants in Aurora. Way to go, Jenny. I love all of the things that are coming in. Helping to write curriculum which advocates for cultural inclusion and the K through 8 Illinois curriculum. We have got some rock stars in this session. Healthcare needs, advocating for family. Yes, Jenny, and I do see some familiar names and um, Zoom faces for some people who were just in the Invest in the Midwest um, virtual rally. Fantastic. Oh goodness, I have a feeling I could let these questions go on forever and we would continue. I am going to move on to the next slide, asking to be paid for work we do outside the classroom. Fantastic. All right, so I asked these same questions to my students. So my students right now are advanced ESL students, and they are co-enrolled in a speech class. And we're doing some service learning, and for the past few years that I've been doing this course, we've had an advocacy focus, right? Using the word advocacy, asking them for their experiences. So I asked my students, what's an example of a time that you advocated for something? Um, and some of their examples you see here range from varying degrees of complexity and seriousness and situation, from when her husband wouldn't let her daughter get her piercing, to things that are very serious, like discrimination at work, or the last one breaks my heart a bit. Mostly in school, sometimes I feel that only smart students can reach their goals. Um, so I want to build on that last comment here about school, because this sentiment was supported and repeated by more than one student in my class. So one student who self-admittedly struggles with digital literacy. Um, and that student said, I know how to learn, I just don't know how to ask for the tools that I need to learn the best way that I can. She actually wasn't the one who wrote this comment, though. The student who wrote this comment um, wrote it about her son. And her son is in elementary school. He has a language processing disorder. And she said that she doesn't feel like his needs are being met through his IEP, which is an individualized education program. And she feels helpless, not knowing how to get him the help that he deserves. So let's connect advocacy here with the theme of this year's Forum for Excellence, which is equity. So oftentimes advocacy yields equity. So if we think back to these two students who shared about their experiences with advocacy and education, the need for accessible materials in school, appropriate resources, and a functional network of services for learners is all connected here to advocacy. And equity is just providing the right tools to each individual so that they can all succeed. So these are some contexts in which advocacy matters. I saw many of these contexts come up in the answers that you shared. This is by all means not an exhaustive list, but advocacy matters in education. It matters in the workplace, healthcare, right? It has life or death um, results in healthcare, rights and social justice, family and at home and within our communities. So the problem that I've encountered in my classroom through trying to integrate and bring some advocacy in, is the assumption that people have the confidence, the language, and the skills to advocate for themselves and others. And this was an assumption that I had for a long time of, well, I'm teaching them English, I'm teaching them literacy skills, and then they'll take those skills and they'll use them to advocate um, in whatever way they need to. And when I started to dig deeper into my assumption, I realized that I was wrong. And I'd like to share, I asked my students a simple question this week. I asked them, do you find it easier to advocate for other people's needs or your own? If you feel like answering this personally, again, this is kind of a vulnerable question to answer, feel free to share it in the chat. But I am going to uh, share some of their answers. So some of them said, oh no, I can advocate for anybody. That's not a problem. Um, but some of them that were that really hit home for me were the students who said, it is easier to advocate for others. And student A said, quote, I am a timid person and I'm always afraid to ask for something or prove something. But if it concerns another person, I automatically become bolder and boldly establish other people's rights. End quote. Another person said, um, I feel, quote, I feel it's easier because I might find arguments for others more easily than me. I mostly underestimate myself. That might be why it feels easier to advocate for others. And I don't know what tools could help me improve it. So my students said, yes, I, I want to advocate, but I'm not comfortable. I don't know how, I don't know what tools I need, which said to me, they don't know, you know, where to begin. So I need to integrate this. I need to begin it here in class. So my way of making progress, infuse it right into my adult education classrooms. And to be clear here, I'm not saying this is a fix to the problem, right? This is a way to make progress. Um, and progress would mean that our students can self-advocate or advocate on behalf of others. So again, the teacher in me says, let's circle back around to our session objectives and just kind of navigate where we are here. So I've highlighted the importance of advocacy skills. I think we were all on the same page in the beginning anyways, that's why you're here. Um, but that is also how I introduce it in my classrooms, right? I ask for them to dig deep, and I do like to say, I also provide them ways to share anonymously without calling out people or asking them to share things that are very personal and are very hard to do at times. But before I shift gears, I would like to open it up to see if there are any questions or anything that you want to comment on related to our first objective, which is the importance of advocacy. And I see some great things in the chat. Yeah, so Michael, great point. Advocating for someone requires the courage to put you or your job on the line, the willingness to write the reports necessary to motivate administration to do the right thing. It's a complex issue. Okay, so let's move on to our final two objectives, which relate to how we can actually infuse advocacy into our adult ed classes. And for this portion, I'm going to focus in on self-advocacy for two reasons. So first, as I said, my students pointed out that self-advocacy for them was more challenging than advocating on behalf of others. So that's reason one. And then secondly, it doesn't require that we address conflicts of interest or run our efforts past our program's board of directors or governmental affairs officials. Right? When you're asking students to advocate on behalf of something else, on a separate cause, there might be red tape that you have to navigate through. And I'll just say, I don't want to advise anybody on how to do that. And if that's something that you want to do, certainly have a conversation with your program on how you can team up to do that. So again, for this next part, focusing in on self-advocacy. And if you can advocate for yourself, you can advocate for anybody. So as we move throughout this presentation, all of the resources that I pull up are also available in a shared Google Drive that you have access to. I put the link in the answer to one of the questions in the Whova app, but I'll also share it out again at the end. I'm sure if I can do a quick copy and paste for you in case it's easier to access that way. Okay. So I wanted to very quickly, I need to do a new share here because let me pull this over. You'll find in that file, and I'm hoping you can see something new that I've shared up here, is an infographic about self-advocacy characteristics. This I'm going to break down in the PowerPoint, but you'll have access to this again in that Google Drive. And I've adapted this infographic from the New Community Center at Independent Living Research Utilization. They help people with disabilities self-advocate. So I aligned their original document, or I also put their original document up there so that you could see it. So you're able to see the original and also able to see the infographic and the alignment that I've made. I also want to point out that the infographic does have hyperlinks. So when you click on interests, strengths, and preferences, it'll pull up some resources for you that are connected to those things. Not everything has a hyperlink on it, but the ones that do will pull some things up that might help you to get started. I'm going to minimize this because I am going to, as I said, have it broken down here on my slides for you as well. So there are 4 categories of self-advocacy characteristics. They are self-awareness, knowledge of rights, communication, and leadership. So I apologize, it's about to get a bit text heavy on your screen, but I thought this would be the easiest way when you look back for notes to have them there. So I've broken down each one of the smaller characteristics under self-awareness into some ideas of how you can align it to your lessons. So the first is interests, strengths, and preferences. And as I go through and kind of share how I've aligned these things, I welcome all of the creative educators to share in the chat ideas that you have, things that you've used. So the ways that I have aligned it in the past are skills inventories and those essential employability skills, right? Having students acknowledge their interests, acknowledge their strengths and their preferences in terms of learning preferences or employability preferences. Goals and dreams is another characteristic of self-awareness. And hey, that's a great way to integrate those SMART goals. Self-awareness also includes support needs. So equity through universal design or reflection, supporting our students and helping them to recognize what supports they need, right? To be a self advocate, to be self aware, you have to know what supports you require. So, giving them all of the options of the different supports, letting them explore what works for them. And then responsibilities. To be a self advocate, you have to be aware of what your responsibilities are. And in a classroom, you can do this by identifying barriers, brainstorming solutions. I often do this connected to SMART goals. What are your goals? What are your barriers? The next category is knowledge of rights. And this one can be a bit harder to do in the classroom, depending on what you're teaching. So I've broken it down into constitutional rights, workers' rights, educational rights, steps to advocate for change, and knowledge of resources. So examples of constitutional rights are, knowing that in the United States, you can express your opinions. You can say no, kind of a defining what constitutional rights are. Of course, in a citizenship class, this is important, but I would argue it's important in a lot of classes. Workers' rights, right? Paid time off, OSHA, medical leave, parental leave. These are conversations I've had in bridge classes when I taught an industrial arts bridge, talking about what your rights are in the workplace and connecting them with those resources. Educational rights. So K through 12 public education, right? In the United States, you are entitled to that. Every child gets a K through 12 public education. The American Disabilities Act rights, making parents and our students aware of what these things are, integrating them into our lessons. And then steps to advocate for change. Right? This is a tough one. Who do you contact? How do you contact this person? The ways that I've done this before is to actually have um, a lesson focused on this. I believe my intention was that it was a letter of complaint, which Jenny, you know these content standards front and back and be able to verify, but I believe that's high intermediate ESL. Writing a letter of complaint and focusing it on a complaint about something in the community and building it out further than just let's write a sample letter of complaint, but going a step further and saying, who would I actually contact about this complaint? And how would I contact them? Do they have an online contact form? Is it an email address? Is it a location where I have to send a letter? Walking through the steps of if I were to act on it, how would I act on it? And I've had students actually act on it and send that email. And we've shared the responses in class when they get them back, usually a couple weeks later. And lastly, knowledge of resources. So who are the nonprofit organizations, the coalitions, the library resources that can help them? And we do a lot of this, of course, in our, aiming for wraparound services and adult education, but making sure that students have these resources somewhere. And I'll also throw in evaluating sources because in those higher level ESL classes and those HSE classes, it's not about just finding what you think is a resource online to help you with whatever you're advocating for, but making sure that it is a reliable resource. My favorite category here of self-advocacy characteristics is communication. So some characteristics within communication are storytelling, assertiveness, negotiation and compromise, body language, listening, and digital literacy. So storytelling is one I'll actually show you a lesson for in a little bit. But within storytelling, I put pathos. If we think of Aristotle's triangle of ethos, pathos, and logos, pathos is about pulling people's emotions, right? So how can you reach people through your story? How can you evaluate the audience to kind of determine what story you should share? For assertiveness, this is a tough one because this is basically confidence, confident, direct speech, those active verbs. It comes through practice. Negotiation and compromise, I build this in through teamwork and workplace skills. Body language, right? This is culturally bound, right? It's important to talk about body language in terms of um, what body language translates to in this culture, which could mean this culture, as in the United States, which is a really large culture that has lots of little cultures within it, or narrowing it down to even within the community within Illinois. Listening skills are important. Practicing or teaching active listening. And of course, the big one that we've all been confronted with in these past couple years, digital literacy, right? Advocating right now, not a lot of people want you walking into their office if they can help it. They want they want things going through contact forms, through emails. Um, so students need to know how to be able to use those things. And if they're trying to advocate on a larger level, understanding what a social media hashtag is. And our last category, and then we'll take a moment to kind of decompress after all of this information. So our last category includes advocating for others or causes. So these are within leadership, organizational participation, and knowledge of organizational or governmental structure. So advocating for others or causes, again, I open this conversation like I did earlier with reflecting on comfort level for advocating for our own needs versus the needs of others and why they feel that way. What tools, I asked them specifically, what tools do you think would help you? And they didn't know. So that said, all right, I need to initiate this. Organizational participation. So if it's a student who, student A who is concerned about her son not getting his needs met through his IEP, is there a nonprofit or a coalition that she could go to get some additional help on how to approach those conversations with teachers, um, to be able to get statistics, things like that. I also put unions up there because when we do bridge classes or workforce development, it's important that students know what a union is and what it does, which is basically advocating on behalf of workers. And then lastly, knowledge of structure. So what are common roles? What is a CEO versus a manager? Who do they reach out to? Do you go straight to the top? Right? If you have an issue with Walmart, who are you contacting? Manager, CEO? And this can be integrated, of course, into civics. So I'm sure through all of that, you saw things that you are already doing, right? So I like to, to stop and point out here for all of my fellow type A teachers, which is me, I'm type A. I don't want you looking at this list like it's bingo and like you want to get as many squares filled in one class as possible. So the goal isn't to do it all. So you can't do all of that in your class and do it well, because that is, to become a self-advocate is a process, right? They're not going to come out of one semester with all of these skills. So I'm going to pause again for 1 second here to address something that might be running through your head. You might be saying, Erin, I'm doing a lot of these things already. I talk about the importance of body language in job interviews. Awesome. But you also said you can't do it all. So what exactly are you saying here? So we are doing many of these things, but I found that there's often two key pieces that are missing in the self-advocacy puzzle. And those two key pieces, and I say this as someone who had these two key pieces missing in my own classes, is direct connection and reflection. So when I asked my advanced ESL students who are co-enrolled in college classes, they have, many of them, topped out on the TABE or topped out on the CASAS. Many of them said they had never heard the word advocacy or advocate before. They had taken many classes by this point, and they hadn't heard those two terms before. So the first step that you can take in your classroom is to make that direct connection. Name self-advocacy as a necessary skill to life, work, and education. So when you have these things already integrated into your class, make sure to take a step back and reiterate, this is advocacy. This is why it matters. And this second part is essential, I've found, is that you need to build in time for reflection. So making time for reflection accomplishes a few goals. So first, it allows students to pause and gather their thoughts. So advocacy is heavy work. It's exhausting. It requires vulnerability, putting yourself out there. It could, for students, bring up difficult thoughts or difficult memories and experiences. And it just helps to give people a little extra processing time. Secondly, it forces us as educators to stop and reflect, right? So their reflection time isn't time for us to like scan through, okay, what are we doing next? But to stop and be there in the moment with your students. And then finally, those reflections that are shared, even anonymously, provide feedback that we can use to guide instruction, to find out what skills our students already have and how they want to use advocacy to adapt our future lessons. So what exactly does this look like? And that brings us to our final objective, which is for me to share a sample lesson and resources with how I've aligned this in a classroom. So I'm going to share a sample lesson that I created about storytelling for advocacy. And I chose this one specifically because storytelling requires a lot of vulnerability, for students to share something about themselves, which means from a teacher perspective, it requires a more structured setup to be able to approach it. So I wanted to give you something with a more structured setup so that you could see how I actually do this in class. So it's also been aligned to ESL content standards, the ELP standards, and the ABE, ASC, ELA standards. This lesson is 100% focused on advocacy, after this, I'll show you a quick list of other topics and how I've connected them on a smaller level. Let me open this up in my, nope, my PDF and slide it over so you can see it. Again, this is also available within the Google Doc that I shared. So I will not read it aloud to you because I'll let you do that on your own. But I do want to point out a few things in here. So I have my standards alignment. So no matter whether you're teaching ESL or HSE, because again, I teach ESL, but these skills transcend ESL. Honestly, I think even as teachers, a lot of us could benefit or would love to benefit from some additional self-advocacy training. So I open it up by, again, asking students to kind of activate their prior knowledge. What have we already talked about? What is storytelling, and what are like 3 situations in which storytelling is important, with the goal that, you know, they'll connect it to areas in their lives where they see it as being important. So if they're career focused right now, it might be in marketing. Maybe you'll have somebody who actually says advocacy, and you can celebrate selling something, right? I always get great stories, great, beautiful paintings of what my life could look like if I just buy this car. Making a connection with someone, right, where you tell a story to kind of show that you are empathetic or sympathetic to somebody else. And then we break it down into what makes a personal story effective. And again, you can, on your own time, you'll be able to click through all of these links to see them, but you'll see that it's scaffolded in a way here where we start by talking about what it means, trying to get them to see, okay, this is important because what you're about to ask them to do might be challenging for them. We practice it by listening to some stories or reading through some stories on StoryCorps and breaking down what that storyteller did well. Here I aligned it with some time order words to kind of bring in a grammar part, but that's optional. And then students kind of reflect on when was the last time that they shared their story of how they got here in adult education. What was the person's reaction? How did you feel? And students can, of course, share out in whatever way they feel comfortable doing. It's after that practice that we come back together and say, all right, let's make a list of what a good story entails. Kind of put together our checklist of what makes a story effective, and let's go and actually work on crafting our stories. I do this in a couple of ways. Students have the option that they can kind of brainstorm and work with somebody else. They can leave the room if they want to put this together. And when it comes time for them to share their stories, they have the option of whether they want to do that in small groups. You know, for a bold few who really love this, they have the option to present out in front of the entire class. Or for other students who say, that's just not really my style, they have the opportunity to post it on Flipgrid instead. So they're not getting that immediate feedback that might make them feel anxious. And then once they come back into the main room, I have them assess themselves based on that rubric. I don't have them assessing each other's stories because, again, you're asking them to share some really personal stuff. Uh, and then at the end, tying it all together with, what connected with you in this lesson? What did you feel was important? That's a really quick overview of it. Like I said, you have it available to you. Um, and I'll try to continue adding some things in there in that shared Google folder so that you have them available. But since time is short, I want to move on really quickly to how to add a little advocacy at a time. If you're thinking, Erin, I've got so much I have to cover every semester. Like, I can't add an entire new topic of advocacy in there and manage to get through everything. I hear you. There is a lot that we need to cover. Um, and if you're still teaching fully remote, the time it takes you to cover things in Zoom, at least for me, we're slowed to half speed. So I've broken it down with some ideas here. So some self-advocacy vocabulary, again, making that direct connection and using the word advocacy, using the verb or the noun advocate. You're a grammar person, and you're thinking, I've been waiting for grammar, Erin. Let's see some grammar. Um, I've got some examples up here, but for all my fellow grammar nerds who have some amazing ideas, please feel free to type it in the chat. I'll add it into the Google Drive. I'll give you credit. But you can, when you're talking about phrasal verbs, speak up for something, reach out to. Talking about self-determination, self-efficacy, and even at those kind of high beginning levels, want versus need. I love food. I feel like everybody loves food. So I always used to do, I want, I need food. I want a cheeseburger. But great examples, fun to do, but also to then, wrap it back into how they can actually use this. I want to learn, I need closed captions so that students, even starting at those beginning levels, are able to advocate, even if it's just advocating to you about what they need in class. And then our teamwork skills of negotiating, compromising, and then some additional linguistic elements because I'm a linguistics nerd. Active verbs, right? If you aren't confident, fake it. Use those active verbs, using pauses and silences, that nonverbal communication, and direct versus indirect speech. And an example of that is the difference between, can I get a raise versus I need a raise, right? One is asking for a yes or no. You're making it real easy for the person to say no because you're giving them a 50-50 option, as opposed to I need a raise, which would be pretty rude for someone to right off the bat say no without opening up a conversation about it. So we highlighted the importance of advocacy skills. We broke it down into characteristics to kind of help guide instruction or help you align it. And then I provided you with a sample lesson and some resources. So again, my resources are available here. I have it posted in the Whova app. I'll make sure to post it again if needed. But if you are passionate about advocacy, if you just want someone to chat with, bounce ideas off of, I miss conferences being in person so that we could chat, but please get in touch with me. Again, my name is Erin Vobornick. You can reach me at evobornick@elgin.edu. I know make sure you get my last name spelling correctly. Otherwise it won't make it to me. But at this point, I'd love to open it up for any questions or comments that you have.
We still have a little bit of time. So if you'd like to unmute yourself or throw something in the chat. we can take a look at that. We'll give it a minute and see.
Yeah. I'll also show what's here in that Google Drive in case you're unable to get in there right now, but are wondering what's in there. Because one question I also get are what are some other resources for learning about advocacy? So I included the Pro Literacy Advocacy Toolkit, which is geared toward us as professionals in the field, but can be, could be beneficial for students too. I see a great question there from Kathleen to the crowd here. She says, how can we best advocate for our adult education programs within our institution at large? And this is a fantastic question. I'm actually, Kathleen, going to copy and paste within the Whova app as well, for those who want to type out a more complex answer to your question.
I think that's a really great question too.
Mhm.
We're still here if you want to throw something in the chat or unmute yourself. But otherwise, I'd like to thank you so much, Erin, for such a great presentation. It was a wonderful end to our sessions to have as our last breakout session. So honestly, thank you so much. It was great. And thank you all for attending this session and attending the 2021 Forum for Excellence. Please be sure to provide feedback for this session on the Whova app. If you just go to this session, you can click rate session. So we really appreciate your participation in that regard. Please also go to the app and participate in the photo contest. That's something we just added to our ending comments here for these. There is a prize for the most liked photo. So please go and participate with that. And also go ahead and take a look at the on-demand sessions in the resources section on the left in the Whova app. If you click on that, you'll see the on-demand sessions. We have some great on-demand sessions. If you could also pop into the exhibitors hall and take a look at what they have in terms of resources and text and whatnot. And Kathleen, I love it. Thank you. And also feel free to follow us on our social media platforms and use our hashtags. So everyone's been doing a great job with that. So please continue to do that throughout the day. It's wonderful to see all those visuals and all that activity. So thank you again, Erin. Thank you, Heather. And thank you all for being here. And have a great rest of your day. Thank you. We have our closing session in a little bit. So we hope you can join us. And then after that, have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much.